play something, then, if you really think you belong here." The words were meant as a joke, a dismissive dare thrown at a woman they thought was just the janitor. But what happened next silenced an entire auditorium. Naomi Walker had spent 11 years quietly polishing the pianos at one of the nation's most prestigious music conservatories, never touching them, never speaking of the gift she buried long ago. No one knew her story. No one asked. No one believed someone like her could possibly belong on that stage. Until one humiliating moment forced her to the keys of a broken, out-of-tune piano. And from the first trembling note, the world began to change. This is the powerful true story of how a quiet, overlooked woman stepped into the spotlight, not with status, not with credentials, but with soul, with truth, and with a sound that would awaken a forgotten piano and an entire generation. Watch until the end, because by the time she plays her final note, you'll never see a janitor or a stage the same way again. Now, before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every single day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now let's get back to the story. You missed a spot. The voice cut through the empty music hall like a sharp rehearsed note, polished, bored, and unmistakably condescending. Naomi Walker turned slowly, her cleaning cloth still in hand. Standing in the doorway was a young man in a crisp navy blazer, his violin case dangling from one shoulder, his lips twisted in a smug half-smile. His name, she recalled, was Blake Arliston, second-year student, son of a hedge fund magnate, and self-proclaimed prodigy. He pointed at the gleaming black surface of the grand piano she had just finished polishing. "Right there," he said, tapping the wood with a manicured finger. "Little smudge." Naomi said nothing. She simply turned back and gently ran her cloth over the spot again, though it was already spotless. Years ago, she might have replied. Now, she let her silence speak louder. Blake, not getting the reaction he wanted, scoffed and walked off toward the practice rooms, his footsteps echoing off the polished marble. The hall fell quiet again. Naomi exhaled softly. It was just past 6 a.m. at the Boston Conservatory of Arts. Morning sun spilled through the high, arched windows, casting streaks of amber across the empty auditorium. The air still smelled faintly of rosin and polish, a perfume Naomi knew better than any song. She had been working here for nearly 11 years, long enough to learn which professors smiled out of politeness, which students looked through her like glass, and which pianos sang even when no one was watching. She wasn't a performer. Not on paper, not in credentials, but the instruments knew her touch. Naomi folded the cloth carefully and stepped back from the piano, tilting her head as she admired her work. The Steinway Model D Grand Academy property since 1983. She could recognize its tone from behind closed doors. It had a warmth in the bass notes that no other piano in the building quite matched. It was her favorite, though no one else knew that. "Mrs. Walker?" A voice called gently from the lobby. She turned to see Miss Patty, the elderly receptionist, perched behind the marble desk, peering over her half-moon glasses. "They're starting to prep the auditorium for the Whitmore competition this evening," she said with a knowing smile. "Best to clear out before the talent shows up." Naomi smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." Patty nodded and returned to her crossword. But Naomi didn't move. Not right away. Her gaze drifted back to the piano, to the bench, empty, waiting. She glanced once toward the hallway. No one. She placed her cleaning cart gently against the wall, walked across the floor with deliberate steps, and sat down on the bench like someone easing into a pew at church. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She didn't press down. Not yet. She just remembered. She was 7 again, sitting on a battered stool in a smoky jazz bar in Savannah, where her mother worked the late shift. After closing, when the chairs were stacked and tips were counted, the pianist, an old man with skin like worn leather and eyes that crinkled when he smiled, would let her touch the piano. "You've got it, little one," he'd whisper as she clumsily explored the notes. "Some folks study their whole lives and never find what you've got inside." Back then, the music felt like a secret, like something only she and the keys understood. But then her mother got sick, and the music stopped. The piano lessons a local church group once tried to fund disappeared beneath overdue rent, medication costs, and long hospital nights. Naomi dropped out of school to work. Dreams were shelved. Survival took the stage. Now, decades later, her fingers still curved the way they did back then, like they remembered who she used to be. She let one finger fall. Middle C. A clean, resonant note hummed in the vast space. Naomi closed her eyes and let the silence after the note settle into her chest. It didn't matter that she had no audience. It never had. Didn't know the cleaning crew gave concerts now. She flinched, visibly this time, and nearly fell off the bench. Turning sharply, she saw a man standing at the far entrance. He wore a campus security uniform, dark blue with silver stripes, and a badge clipped to his belt. He raised both hands in mock surrender. "Sorry," he said, smiling warmly. "Didn't mean to startle you." Naomi blinked. I wasn't playing." "Well," he said, stepping into the room, "you were sitting at a piano and pressing keys. That's playing, isn't it?" Naomi stood up quickly, smoothing the front of her gray uniform. "I should go." "You don't have to." She looked at him for the first time, really looked. He was younger than her, maybe late 20s, with gentle eyes and a calmness that didn't match the job. The tag on his uniform read Jordan. He motioned to the piano. "Play something." She shook her head. "I don't really. I'm not trained. Your hands say different." Jordan replied, his voice still soft. Naomi looked down. Her fingers were still curved over imaginary keys. A pianist's fingers, a secret she hadn't shared in years. "I never had lessons, not really." "Doesn't mean you don't know how." She picked up her cleaning supplies, deflecting. "These instruments aren't for people like me." Jordan tilted his head. "What kind of people are you?" The question froze her. Simple, quiet, devastating. She opened her mouth but had no good answer, only the dull echoes of what life had told her for years. "You're not enough. You're just staff. Stay invisible." Jordan seemed to sense the storm behind her silence. "You know," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe, "the Whitmore competition has a wild card slot. One spot for an unknown. Open audition tomorrow morning." Naomi laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in days, sharp and bitter. "Sure," she said. "I'll just walk in wearing this and tell them I'd like to play against students who've had tutors since they were 4. Jordan shrugged. "Why not?" She stared at him. "What's the worst that could happen?" he asked. "Humiliation," she replied. "Laughter, confirmation of everything I've already believed for 20 years. Or," he said gently, "the opposite." She blinked. He looked at his watch. "I should finish my rounds. Just thought you should know. Sign-up's closed tonight." He walked backward toward the lobby, his voice lingering as he went. Would be a shame if the best player in this building never got to be heard. And with that, he was gone. Naomi stood in the empty hall, her hand resting lightly on the piano's lid. His words wrapped around her like a song she once knew. She picked up her cart, wheeled it toward the back exit, and disappeared through the service hallway, leaving behind a gleaming piano, an echo of music, and a possibility she wasn't quite ready to name. The afternoon wind pressed against Naomi's coat as she stepped off the train in Dorchester. Her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, filled with cleaning rags, an extra pair of gloves, and the leftover sandwich she hadn't touched at lunch. She walked the 4 blocks to her building, an aging red brick complex with ivy clinging stubbornly to the cracks, and paused to check her mailbox out of habit. Bills, flyers, a dentist coupon, and something glossy. Her fingers stopped on it. A pamphlet, thick, smooth paper, gold foil embossed across the top. The Whitmore Invitational, Discover the Next Great Virtuoso. Below the title were full-color portraits of previous winners, poised young men and women in tuxedos and gowns, seated behind gleaming pianos, their faces confident, almost smug. She flipped the pamphlet over. The wildcard audition was listed in bold. Open slot. 1 unnamed talent will be selected to compete in this year's finals. Audition. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., main hall. First 20 applicants only. Naomi stared at it for a long moment before stuffing it between the utility bill and a pizza coupon. Inside her apartment, she placed her cleaning supplies beside the old radiator and sat at her small kitchen table. The room was quiet, too quiet. She opened the window slightly to hear the life outside. Traffic, children shouting, a dog barking 2 blocks over. She unfolded the pamphlet again. 1 slot. Just 1. And it wasn't just the odds, it was the absurdity. She had no resume, no repertoire, no mentor whispering, "You're ready." Her uniform still smelled faintly of varnish and ammonia. Her fingers tapped on the table, absent-minded, instinctive. She realized the pattern she was tapping was a piece she had started years ago. No sheet music existed. It lived inside her body, in her muscle memory, in the quiet. Naomi shook her head, closed the pamphlet, and rose to toss it into the trash. But before she could, she looked at it one last time. A single line at the bottom read, "Sometimes, greatness hides in plain sight." She froze, then slid it into the drawer instead. The next morning, Naomi lingered longer than usual after her shift. She found herself walking slower through the hallway that led to the main recital hall. She wasn't consciously heading there, but her feet seemed to have made the decision before her mind had caught up. The building buzzed with activity. Young musicians walked with the confidence of people who had been told their entire lives they were special. They wore tailored suits and silk scarves, carried expensive sheet music portfolios, and traded stories about private tutors in Vienna or childhood summers spent at Juilliard Prep. Naomi stood just behind a marble column near the audition entrance, trying to stay unnoticed. But Jordan saw her. He appeared beside her without a word at first, his posture easy, like he belonged there, like he knew she didn't but wasn't going to say it. "You came," he said, smiling. "I didn't say I was auditioning," she answered quickly. Jordan nodded. "Right, just observing." She gestured to her faded uniform. "I can't go in there looking like this. I don't have music. I don't even own proper shoes." He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded paper. "I picked up a registration form last night," he said. "Just in case." Naomi stared at him. "I heard you," he added quietly. "Yesterday. You didn't know I was there. I was doing my rounds." Her stomach turned. "You were spying on me?" "I was listening," he said. "There's a difference. I've worked security here for 5 years. I've heard a lot of people play, some brilliant, some mediocre. But what you did..." He paused, searching for the right word. "It was real. You weren't just hitting notes, you were speaking." Naomi folded her arms tightly across her chest. "It was nothing." "It wasn't," he said. Across the room, a sharp chime sounded. The sign-up table was closing in 5 minutes. "Last chance," said a woman behind a long table. She wore a charcoal suit and a name tag that read Meredith Clark, Program Coordinator. Naomi's breath caught. She looked down at the form in her hand. She thought of all the reasons not to do it. The laughter, the judgment, the humiliating comparison to musicians who had lived in conservatories while she had cleaned them. And then, like a distant whisper, another voice surfaced. "What kind of people are you?" Naomi stepped forward. The people at the sign-up table noticed her uniform immediately. Meredith Clark looked up, surprised, but masked it quickly with professional courtesy. "I'd like to audition," Naomi said, handing her the form. Meredith accepted it with a stiff nod. "Name?" "Naomi Walker." "And your piece?" "It's an original composition." Meredith blinked. The committee generally prefers classical selections. Chopin, Beethoven, Schumann. Naomi held her ground. "It's all I have." Meredith made a notation on the form. "Very well, you'll be last in the order." As Naomi turned to walk away, she could feel eyes tracking her every step. She joined a small group of contestants seated nearby. Some gave her curious glances. Others looked openly amused. One man, young and clean-shaven, leaned over and whispered, "I think you're in the wrong room. Custodial orientation's downstairs." A few snickers followed. Naomi didn't respond. She stared at the door to the audition hall instead. She'd cleaned that room every week for over a decade. She'd wiped those keys more times than she could count. She knew the acoustics, the creaks in the floorboards, the way the light shifted as the day wore on. The only thing she didn't know was whether she could survive what came next. The audition door opened again. A young woman stepped out, clutching her leather-bound scorebook. Her face was bright with restrained glee, the kind of glow reserved for people who knew they'd nailed it, but were still pretending to be modest. She passed Naomi without looking. "Next," called Meredith Clark from the hall. The name she read wasn't Naomi's, but they were getting closer. Naomi sat stiffly in the waiting area, her back not touching the chair. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers fidgeting without rhythm. Her uniform, gray and starch-stiff, felt louder with every passing minute, like it screamed janitor in a room full of pedigree. Across from her sat the same man who had made the joke earlier, dark suit, silk tie, golden cufflinks catching the light. He leaned back, clearly comfortable, and smiled like someone who already knew how the story ended. "What piece are you performing?" he asked, voice oily. Naomi hesitated. "Original composition." His brow lifted, feigned surprise. "Oh, so you compose as well as clean?" There it was, the barb. She looked away. He chuckled softly. "I'll let you borrow one of my extra scores. Maybe you can say it's yours." Someone nearby stifled a laugh. Naomi said nothing. She had cleaned vomit from recital room carpets. She had removed cigarette burns from velvet benches. She could survive words, but it didn't mean they didn't hurt. The door opened again. Another contestant, this one teary-eyed, stepped out quickly and avoided eye contact with the group. No explanation necessary. The Whitmore judges weren't known for kindness. Naomi exhaled quietly. Just then, she felt someone slide into the seat next to her. "Jordan. How'd you get in here?" she asked under her breath, startled. He gave a sly smile. "Security perk. They think I'm checking the fire exits." She glanced at him, unsure whether to be grateful or embarrassed. "You're almost up," he said gently. "I know. You okay?" Naomi didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the black lacquered door across the hall. It felt like a gate. Final, sealed, heavy. "I don't belong here," she finally whispered. "That's a lie someone told you a long time ago," he said. "And you believed it?" Her throat tightened. The door opened again. This time it was him, the smug one. He walked out like a model on a runway, casually adjusting his sleeves. "Well," he announced to no one in particular. "Dr. Hanover said my phrasing had mature elegance. Not bad for 23, huh?" He shot Naomi a smirk as he passed. "Good luck with your jazz experiment." Meredith Clark poked her head out. "Naomi Walker?" Naomi stood slowly, knees a little stiff. Jordan gave her a nod. "You've already done the hard part." She didn't respond. Her feet moved on their own, crossing the polished wood floor, the door swinging open like a curtain rising. The audition room was colder than she remembered. 3 judges sat behind a long table on a raised platform. The lights were bright, angled down to the stage like searchlights. A handful of previous contestants lingered in the back, whispering, watching. At the center sat Dr. Celeste Hanover. Impeccably dressed in a cream blazer, her silver hair twisted into a perfect chignon, she studied Naomi as if she were examining an unfamiliar ingredient in a well-practiced recipe. Beside her sat a younger woman with sleek, pinned hair and a stack of notes, and on the other side, a man with round spectacles who looked as though he had never smiled in his life. Naomi stopped at the center mark, just as she'd seen the others do. "Miss Walker," Dr. Hanover said, peering down. "It says here you'll be performing an original composition." "Yes, ma'am," Naomi replied softly. "And your musical background?" Naomi hesitated. "Self-taught." A ripple moved through the audience like a breeze across glass. The younger female judge leaned toward Dr. Hanover and whispered something behind her hand. Hanover nodded once, nearly imperceptible. "I see," she said, smiling faintly. "And you work here at the conservatory?" "I do." "In what capacity?" "I clean," Naomi answered plainly. The murmur this time wasn't a whisper, it was open, audible. Naomi caught fragments. "Is this a joke? Are they filming something? Publicity stunt, maybe?" Dr. Hanover raised one long finger and gestured toward the shining grand piano on stage. "Well, Miss Walker, please proceed." Naomi took a step forward, but before she could sit, Hanover's voice interrupted again, this time syrupy and falsely concerned. "Actually," she said, "I wonder if that particular piano is appropriate." Naomi stopped. Hanover turned to the younger judge. "Don't we have another instrument?" The woman pointed. In the far corner sat an upright piano, old, dull, slightly warped from age. "That one hasn't been tuned for the competition," she said. "Perfect," Hanover declared. "It may be more forgiving for a unique performance." The insult was dressed in silk, but everyone heard it. Naomi stood still for a moment. The air in the room waited. She turned and walked toward the old piano. The wood was scratched. A pedal creaked when she tested it. A few of the keys had small chips. But it was a piano. It had lived. She had played worse. From behind her, she heard Hanover's voice, playful now. "I'm afraid that one hasn't been serviced in quite some time." Naomi placed her fingers gently on the keys. "If it's too difficult," Hanover added, "we understand." Naomi didn't look up. She simply replied, "This piano is fine." There was a pause. Then Hanover smiled. "As you wish. Begin when ready." Naomi closed her eyes, and for a moment, she wasn't in that room. She wasn't in Boston. She wasn't in a janitor's uniform. She was in Savannah. 7 years old, her feet dangling off the bench, the smell of old wood and cigarette smoke in the air, her fingers hovering above the keys like they always had, that jazz pianist whispering in her ear, "Play what's inside." She took a breath and began. The first note wavered. Soft, a little dull. The piano's worn hammers resisted, and someone in the back of the room stifled a laugh. Naomi heard it, but didn't let it shake her. Her left hand settled into a steady rhythm, deep and grounded, like footsteps through an alley. Her right began to explore a melody, simple at first, tentative. The instrument grumbled beneath her fingers, every note slightly weathered, every chord a negotiation. But Naomi kept playing. She knew this piano, even if she'd never touched it before. She knew the way old things creaked, the way imperfections could still carry beauty. She wasn't here to impress, she was here to speak. Behind the judge's table, Celeste Hanover tilted her head, her smile still in place, but thinner now, less amused. This wasn't the clumsy amateur moment she'd prepared herself for. Naomi's melody grew richer, her hands more confident. She closed her eyes and let go. The piece she played didn't have a title. She'd never written it down. It was just a collection of feelings, fragments of memory braided together into music. Hints of gospel from childhood Sundays. The bounce of jazz from that smoky club in Savannah. The melancholy of midnight shifts. The ache of hope she'd forced herself to bury. Each note told a piece of her story, without apology. And slowly the room began to shift. The laughter stopped. The whispering stilled. A low hum of reverence crept in. Even the old piano, strained and neglected, seemed to rise under her hands. Its tone began to soften, to open, as though it too was remembering what it once was. Celeste's fingers tapped the table, the smile fading. She leaned over to the younger judge and murmured something. But the woman didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Naomi, wide with something almost like wonder. "Interesting approach," Celeste suddenly said aloud, cutting into the air. Naomi flinched, but kept playing. "Perhaps," Celeste continued, "something more conventional might better demonstrate your skills. A Chopin etude, for instance." Naomi's fingers paused, hovering. "I don't play Chopin," she said quietly. "No?" Celeste's voice was honeyed, but cold. "Not even a simple waltz?" The male judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Surely," she pressed on, "any pianist hoping to compete can manage that." There was a silence, sharp and suspended. "I'm not trying to compete like them," Naomi said, her voice clear. "I'm trying to be heard." Celeste's lips twitched. "Well, anyone can string together a few pretty notes, but this is a stage for mastery, not storytelling." The remark struck like a slap. Naomi looked down. Her hands had stopped moving. She felt the old instinct rise, the one that said, "Stand up, apologize, disappear." But then something deeper pushed back. "This is your moment. Yours." Celeste stood abruptly and walked toward the stage, her heels clicking like punctuation across the wood. "Perhaps," she said, addressing the audience now, "it would help to demonstrate the level of refinement we're looking for." She gestured to the piano. Naomi rose from the bench slowly, her back straight. Celeste sat with the air of royalty returning to her throne. She adjusted the seat, flexed her fingers, looked at the judges as if to say, "Watch closely." "This instrument," she announced, "is far from ideal, but a true artist adapts." She played a Chopin nocturne, flawless, practiced, technically pristine. Every note landed with precision, her posture immaculate, her phrasing textbook. The piano resisted her too, but her fingers fought back, controlling each sound like a conductor with a leash. 2 minutes. She ended on a delicate high note, let it ring, and then turned to Naomi with a composed smile. "That is the level of control we expect," she said. "Now, would you like to try again with something more appropriate, or shall we consider your audition concluded?" The room was still. All eyes fell on Naomi. Some expected her to shrink, others wanted her to fight. Naomi didn't move. She stood beside the battered upright and let the moment settle. Then, softly but clearly, "I'd like to continue with my piece." Celeste's expression froze, but she stepped aside, gracefully, as if letting a child have one more turn on the playground before the bell rang. "Very well," she said with a nod to the committee, "though I believe we've already seen enough." Naomi didn't look at her. She sat back down. And this time, when her hands touched the keys, there was no hesitation. She began again. The music unfolded like a breath she'd been holding for years. It wasn't just melody now, it was fire, wind, memory. The rhythms deepened, syncopated in ways that classical purists might frown at, but couldn't deny. Jazz chords bent and twisted around mournful progressions. Sudden bursts of beauty emerged from unexpected places, like laughter during grief or sun in a broken window. The old piano came alive. It didn't matter that it was flawed, so was she. That was the point. In the back row, a man with white hair and thick glasses leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. A younger woman stopped writing altogether, her pen frozen above the page. Even the smug contestant who had mocked her earlier now stared without blinking. Naomi's piece surged toward a crescendo, her hands moving faster than most believed possible for someone without formal training. Her entire body swayed with the rhythm. A curl fell into her face, but she didn't stop to brush it away. The audience wasn't just listening now. They were feeling. When the final chord arrived, Naomi held it for a moment, and then released. Silence. The kind of silence that falls only when something sacred has just happened. 5 seconds. 10. No one moved. Then softly, a clap. From the far back, another followed. And then, it erupted. Applause thundered across the recital hall, washing over her in waves. People rose from their chairs. Some whistled. Others cried. Elderly patrons stood with trembling hands, clapping as though they'd just been reminded of something they'd forgotten they loved. Naomi remained seated, stunned. That sound, so much bigger than applause, wasn't politeness. It was recognition, pure and real. The male judge stood, still clapping. The female judge followed, her eyes damp, a wide smile breaking through. Only Celeste remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. As the applause finally began to ebb, the male judge stepped forward. "Miss Walker," he said, voice a little rough, "that was extraordinary, truly extraordinary." He turned to the others. The technical complexity alone would challenge players with decades of conservatory experience. And the emotional expression, the female judge added, the narrative voice of it, that's something you can't teach. Naomi stood slowly. Her hands trembled at her sides. A voice called from the audience, "Where'd you learn to play like that?" Naomi looked down at the piano, then back at them. "Life," she answered. "I learned from life." The room still shimmered with the echoes of applause as Naomi stepped back from the piano. Her fingers ached faintly, her heart was racing, but her soul was still playing. The music hadn't just filled the recital hall, it had poured through the cracks of her life, seeping into places she'd locked away for years. The audience began to settle, though many still glanced at one another as if to silently confirm. "Did you feel that too? Was that real?" In the back of the room, a familiar figure emerged. Jordan. He had slipped in during the performance, his security badge tucked discreetly into his jacket. He stood with his arms folded, a proud smile stretching across his face. When Naomi caught his eye, he gave a slow thumbs up and mouthed 2 words, "Told you." Naomi almost laughed. She'd nearly thrown that form away, nearly walked out, nearly let fear speak louder than her fingers. But she hadn't. And now, the walls of a world that had always felt too high to reach were starting to shift. Dr. Celeste Hanover rose at last. The applause had faded, but the tension returned. Curious, cautious. Cautious. What would she say? Celeste smoothed her blazer with practiced poise, then stepped forward with the measured elegance of someone trained not only in music, but in authority. She looked at Naomi directly, her expression unreadable. "The wildcard selection process," she began, her voice crisp, "normally requires committee deliberation, several rounds of discussion. A beat." She glanced at her fellow judges. They both nodded emphatically. "But I believe today," she continued, "we've reached an unprecedented consensus." The room held its breath. "Naomi Walker," she said clearly, "the Whitmore Invitational welcomes you as this year's wildcard finalist." A second wave of applause swept through the room. Not polite, not obligatory, euphoric. Naomi's knees almost gave out. She gripped the edge of the piano, breath catching in her chest. It was real. The woman in the janitor's uniform, the cleaner they ignored, the ghost in the hallway. She had arrived. People surged forward. Judges, faculty, a few stunned contestants. They offered congratulations, asked questions, scribbled notes. "What's your process like? Have you ever recorded? Would you be willing to mentor? Do you have representation?" Naomi didn't know how to answer any of them. She just smiled politely, blinking against the daze. Then a light touch on her arm. She turned. "Celeste." The older woman's face was softer now, her pride still intact, but something deeper shining through, respect. "You played that old piano," Celeste said quietly, as if it were a Steinway. Naomi tilted her head. It deserved the chance to be heard. Celeste paused. A shadow of a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps," she said, "we both misjudged." Naomi held her gaze. After a moment, Celeste extended her hand. There was a flicker of hesitation, but Naomi took it. It was firm. Sincere. Not as judge to competitor, but musician to musician. The hall began to empty, as the afternoon sun filtered through the upper windows, casting a golden glow across the wood floors. Naomi remained behind a few minutes longer, seated at the upright piano like a woman catching her breath after a long run uphill. Jordan approached quietly and slid onto the bench beside her. "You do realize," he said, "you just scared the hell out of everyone in this building." Naomi smirked. "Good." He leaned back, arms resting on the top of the bench. "They're gonna remember this." Naomi looked around the hall. This place she had swept, polished, dusted for 11 years. It still smelled the same, still echoed the same, but somehow it wasn't the same anymore. She wasn't the same. "I never thought I'd play in here," she said softly. Jordan looked at her. "You didn't just play, you owned it." She smiled again, wider this time. As she stepped out into the street a little later, the winter wind caught her coat and whipped it behind her. But it didn't chill her. In her pocket was a copy of the official program, her name newly written beside the wildcard slot. She wasn't just part of the building anymore, she was part of the stage. Back in her apartment that evening, Naomi placed the program on her table. For once, she didn't clean, she didn't cook, she didn't turn on the TV. Instead, she sat down with a pencil and blank sheet of paper and started to write her music, for real this time. Not just from memory, but from truth. Because from now on, she wouldn't play in the shadows. From now on, the world would listen. "Do you have a press photo?" Naomi blinked. "A what?" "A press photo," the assistant repeated, holding a clipboard and tapping the top sheet. "For the program booklet. They go out to sponsors, donors, local media. Just a headshot. We can schedule something later today." I don't have one," Naomi said, adjusting the strap of her bag. The assistant gave her a polite, non-judgmental smile. "No worries, we'll arrange it." She scribbled something on the sheet and moved on to the next finalist without missing a beat. Naomi stood in the hallway of the Boston Conservatory, unsure whether to laugh or bolt. Around her, the other finalists, young, glossy, confident, milled about in tailored coats and expensive perfume. She was still in her gray uniform jacket. Her work shoes squeaked slightly when she shifted her weight. "Naomi Walker," someone called behind her. She turned. It was Dr. Celeste Hanover. "Come," the judge said with a nod. "Walk with me." It didn't sound like a request. Naomi followed as they strolled down the long corridor, past portraits of former prodigies, platinum records, and trophies encased in glass. Celeste spoke without turning. "I've reviewed your performance several times now." Naomi stayed quiet. "You have something the others do not," Celeste continued. "You don't just play notes, you command them. They follow you. That is exceedingly rare." Naomi looked at the floor, unsure how to respond. "You are untrained," Celeste said, "which means your phrasing is raw, your transitions unstructured, and your technique, well, inconsistent." Naomi braced herself. "But," Celeste added, "you also have instinct. And instinct," she said, finally turning to face her, "cannot be taught." Naomi met her eyes. For the first time, Celeste wasn't looking through her. "I can offer guidance," Celeste said. "Not to change your voice, but to help you survive what comes next." "What is coming next?" Naomi asked. Celeste paused. "The finals, and scrutiny." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't even performed for a crowd in 20 years, let alone under cameras, lights, critics. Celeste saw her hesitation. "They will underestimate you," she said softly. "Again, that's the price of entering the world uninvited. But when you walk onto that stage, walk like it was built for you." The following days moved like a whirlwind. On Monday, she was scheduled for a rehearsal in the main concert hall. Tuesday, a journalist from the Boston Globe requested an interview. Wednesday, someone on Twitter had posted a blurry video clip of her wild card audition, and it had already passed 80,000 views. "She's the janitor," one caption read, "but she plays like she's been waiting a lifetime." By Friday, the Academy had cleaned up her nameplate on the staff schedule. It no longer read custodial. Naomi W. It simply read finalist. And with that, the music world began to pay attention. Jordan met her outside rehearsal with 2 coffee cups in hand. Hazelnut? He asked. She smiled. You remembered. They sat on a bench beneath the towering ivy wall that lined the north courtyard. It was quiet here, far from the rehearsal pianos and clanging practice rooms. They're all talking about you now, Jordan said. Your video's gone viral. Music blogs, TikTok, Reddit. I don't even have a smartphone, she said. Then lucky you, he grinned. You've missed the chaos. She took a sip, letting the warm liquid settle her nerves. You scared, Walker? She looked up at him. Terrified. He nodded. Good. Good? It means you care. She let out a breath and looked out over the courtyard. They keep treating me like I came from another planet, she said. Like I wandered into the wrong world. You didn't wander, he said. You belong here. You proved that. I played one song. No. You told the truth, and that's rarer than any score. Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. That evening, Celeste invited her to a private coaching session. They met in the oldest rehearsal room in the building, a modest wood-paneled space with no mirrors and a single upright piano that reminded Naomi of the one she'd played at the audition. Celeste stood beside the piano with a metronome and a folder of blank sheet music. Show me what you're working on. Naomi sat and began to play, slow, deliberate, improvisational. Celeste stopped her halfway through. Don't wander, she said. Shape it. I'm not sure how. You don't have to know yet, just don't get lost. Naomi tried again. Celeste interrupted less this time. When they finished, the older woman leaned against the windowsill and crossed her arms. You remind me of someone I once knew, she said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Another cleaning lady? No, Celeste said, smiling faintly. My sister. She was the rebel, jazz instead of classical. Improvisation over Bach. She used to say, Celeste, music isn't just a sound, it's a feeling with a spine. What happened to her? Celeste looked away. She stopped playing. The world didn't make space for her sound. Naomi said nothing. Celeste looked back. Don't stop, not ever. The night before the finals, Naomi returned to the empty recital hall. The lights were dimmed. The piano had been polished, the stage decorated with floral arrangements and banners bearing the Whitmore logo. She approached the grand piano, not the battered upright from before, but the centerpiece, the one that gleamed under the chandelier, the one she once believed she wasn't allowed to touch. She sat. No one was watching, no one to judge, and yet she felt a shiver of electricity in her fingertips. She didn't play. Not yet. She simply closed her eyes and listened to the echo of her journey, to the weight of her scars, to the silence that had always made space for her music. This time she wasn't playing to survive. She was playing to claim. Is this seat taken? Naomi looked up. A slender woman in a navy dress suit stood by the auditorium row, her press badge swinging gently from a lanyard. Cynthia Rowland, The New York Times. Naomi blinked. No, not taken. Cynthia sat beside her, flipping open a small leather notebook. The finals would begin in an hour, but already the audience was gathering, an elegant sea of tuxedos, cocktail dresses, and hushed murmurs of anticipation. I don't mean to intrude, Cynthia said, but I was hoping to speak with you before your performance. Naomi nodded hesitantly. All right. I've followed the Whitmore for years, Cynthia said, but I've never seen a wild card shake the competition like this. Some people are calling you a miracle of intuition. Others say you're a symbol of everything classical music has forgotten, soul over polish. What do you think you represent? Naomi took a breath. I don't think I'm a symbol, she said softly. I think I'm a person. A person who loves music and finally had the chance to be heard. Cynthia nodded, scribbling notes quickly. And what do you hope the judges hear today? Naomi turned her eyes to the grand piano on stage. I hope they hear truth. Backstage, Naomi sat alone. Around her, the other finalists rehearsed their fingerings, adjusted their gowns, muttered through the air with nerves dressed as arrogance. She stayed quiet. Celeste arrived 5 minutes before the start. She wore a sleek black dress and carried no clipboard, no sheet music, only presence. Are you ready? She asked. Naomi hesitated. No, she said. Celeste smiled. Good, that means you're about to do something honest. They stood in silence together until an assistant knocked twice on the door. They're ready for you, Miss Walker. Naomi rose. Her legs felt heavy. Her palms were damp. her stomach twisted into something too large to swallow. As she stepped toward the wings, Jordan appeared, standing just off stage in his dark security uniform, arms crossed like a silent sentinel. He didn't speak, he just nodded. That was enough. The hall lights dimmed, a spotlight flooded the stage. Naomi walked to the Steinway like a woman approaching a sacred altar. For years, she had polished its lacquered surface, had whispered near it, not dared to touch it, had watched it from behind a mop bucket. Now, she stood before it as the final performer of the evening. The applause was polite but uncertain. The audience still didn't know what to make of her. Her story had gone viral, yes, but many were waiting to confirm whether she was real or just a fluke. She sat down. No sheet music, no accompanist, no pre-written program note, just her. The judges watched, pens poised. Celeste sat among them now, not as her guide, but as her evaluator. Naomi placed her hands on the keys, and then she paused, one beat, two, and began. The first note was quiet, barely a whisper, but it curled through the silence like smoke. Then the second, the third, a phrase. She didn't play fast, she didn't play flashy, she played honest. The piece began with the slow, aching melody she had developed years ago in the echo of her mother's hospital room. It moved like a lullaby cracked by grief, gentle in tone, heavy in memory. Then gradually, it unfolded into something more layered. Minor chords transitioned to brighter intervals. Jazz flourishes rose from classical structure. Hints of gospel underlined passages that sounded like prayer. The audience shifted forward in their seats. Something was happening. Something they hadn't expected. Naomi's fingers moved with a dancer's control, fluid, expressive, but grounded. Every chord told a story. Every transition opened a door. She was no longer performing, she was testifying. The piece climbed, rising through doubt, through the sting of past rejection, through the memory of being invisible in a room just like this. And then came silence. Naomi paused, her hands hovered. The bridge was coming, the moment where the piece tipped from memory to revelation. And that's when she did something no one expected. She closed her eyes, lifted her hands, and began to improvise. The room stiffened. Improvisation in the Whitmore finals? Unthinkable. But Naomi didn't flinch. She leaned into the silence and filled it with music that hadn't existed a second before. A syncopated left hand tapped out a heartbeat of defiance. Her right hand danced, looping phrases into new phrases, weaving memory with imagination. It was blues, it was gospel, it was unscored and alive. Even Celeste leaned forward, her eyes no longer narrowed. They were wide. As Naomi played, something passed through the crowd, an unspoken awareness that they were witnessing not just a performance, but a reckoning. The woman in the janitor's shoes had not only entered their world, she had remade it. When she finally landed the closing note, a single delicate C sharp, the entire hall fell into a kind of sacred stillness. Then, applause. But this time, it didn't roll in slowly. It exploded. People stood. They cheered, they clapped, they cried. In the second row, a prominent music critic wiped his eyes and whispered, "That wasn't a performance. That was a resurrection." Naomi stood slowly, eyes still adjusting to the floodlights. From the wings, she saw Jordan. He wasn't clapping. He had one hand over his heart. Naomi bowed, not out of politeness, but out of gratitude. She had come to the stage as a ghost. She was leaving it fully seen. Naomi stood in the wings, her chest rising and falling like the last measure of a hard-won symphony. Behind her, the thunder of applause still echoed. But in her ears, it was muted, dreamlike, like a tide pulling away from the shore. A judge had called it a resurrection. A critic had compared her to Nina Simone. And yet, standing barefoot in her soul, Naomi felt still. Not triumphant, not proud, just present. Celeste appeared beside her, expression unreadable. "You improvised," she said quietly. Naomi looked at her, unsure if it was a statement or an accusation. Celeste's gaze didn't waver. "You broke every rule." Naomi waited. Then Celeste's mouth curved, just slightly. "Thank God." The green room buzzed with whispers. Producers, press reps, faculty, all of them speaking Naomi's name like it had just been invented. "She's a national story now. Someone call NPR." "I heard Quincy Jones already reached out." Naomi sat in the corner, clutching a warm paper cup of tea she hadn't asked for. She watched the room as if through glass. No one had seen her a week ago. Now, they all wanted a piece of her. Jordan entered and headed straight to her. "You good?" She nodded. "I think so." He crouched beside her chair. That was the most human thing I've ever heard come out of an instrument. Naomi laughed softly. You always talk like a poet? Only when you play like that. They shared a look, something unspoken and grounding. Then an organizer approached. Miss Walker, the judges will announce the placements in a few minutes. Please follow me to the reception hall. Naomi stood, nerves returning. Not because she needed to win, but because part of her still didn't believe she belonged. The reception hall was adorned in velvet and crystal. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in bow ties carried trays of flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Naomi ignored them all. She walked toward the stage at the center of the room, where the other finalists had gathered, poised, polished, rehearsed. She stood apart, as always, but this time, no one laughed, no one whispered. They looked at her with something between awe and fear. Even the smug contestant from the audition, a violinist named Preston, avoided her gaze entirely. She had been the underdog. Now she was the measure. Celeste took the podium. Her presence demanded attention without asking for it. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, this year's Whitmore Invitational has brought us a finalist group of exceptional talent, but among them emerged a performance that redefined the language of this competition. She looked at Naomi. Miss Naomi Walker did not come to us through pedigree, recommendation, or reputation. She came through a door few dare to open, the one marked unknown. A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. Celeste continued. Her music was not flawless, but it was fearless. It reminded us that technique is the skeleton, but soul is the heartbeat. She turned toward Naomi fully. It is my honor to announce that this year's winner of the Whitmore Invitational Grand Prize, a beat, is Miss Naomi Walker. Gasps, cheers, a camera flash, and then total silence around her. Naomi didn't move, not for a full second. It wasn't until Jordan whispered, "You did it," that she remembered to breathe. She walked to the stage, every step echoing in her chest. Celeste handed her a glass plaque etched in gold. And beneath the applause, Celeste said softly, "You've opened the door for more than just yourself." Naomi nodded, and for the first time since she arrived at the academy 11 years ago, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a conductor of her own life. Later that night, Naomi returned to her apartment, still in her dress, still in disbelief. She didn't turn on the light. She just sat at the kitchen table, the award beside her, and let the quiet settle. Her hands, still tingling, rested on the table's edge. She flexed her fingers. They no longer felt like a janitor's hands. They felt like a composer's. Not because of the trophy, but because now, she believed it too. The first knock came just after 6:30 a.m. Naomi, still in her robe, opened the door to find a tall woman in a red scarf and heavy camera bag standing in the hallway. "Naomi Walker?" Naomi blinked. "Yes? Danielle Rivers, CBS Morning News. We're filming a feature on breakout talents across America. Your name came up more than once. Do you have 10 minutes? Naomi looked down at her fuzzy slippers. "I don't even have coffee yet." Danielle smiled. "We brought our own." That same day, a call came from the Boston Globe, then The Guardian, then a woman named Tracy from NPR. By nightfall, Naomi's email inbox, previously reserved for cleaning schedules and supply restocks, was full of interview requests, speaking engagements, even offers to teach. She laughed out loud when she saw one subject line, "Juilliard Guest Lecturer Opportunity. Are you available this spring?" Naomi shook her head. "Me? Teaching?" But as the week wore on, she began to realize people weren't just curious. They were hungry for something they hadn't heard in years. A reminder that music wasn't only for the polished and the privileged, but also for the ones who played in silence for decades, waiting for a door to crack open. The Academy issued an official statement 3 days after the finals. "We are proud to recognize Naomi Walker not only as a finalist, but as a new voice in the evolving future of music. Her appointment as an artist-in-residence will begin this fall." Naomi had to read it twice, then again, slowly. The same institution where she had once been handed latex gloves and a key ring now wanted her to mentor. 1 week later, she returned to the conservatory, not as a custodian, but as a guest. Jordan waited for her at the side entrance, holding 2 coffees. "New badge?" he asked, pointing at the black lanyard around her neck. She held it up. "Naomi Walker, artist-in-residence guest faculty." "Still surreal," she admitted. Jordan grinned. "You know what else is surreal?" "What?" They changed the plaque on the faculty recital hall. It now lists all Whitmore finalists for the past 20 years. He winked. Your name's the only one in gold. Naomi shook her head, smiling. I didn't ask for any of this. You didn't have to, he said. You earned it? Her first seminar drew 37 students. Some of them recognized her from the stage, others from the video, but most just knew the feeling they had when they heard her play. Naomi stood at the front of the room, in front of the whiteboard, hands clasped. I don't have formal pedagogy, she said, but I do have something else. She moved to the upright piano tucked in the corner and played a simple phrase, something raw and real, unfinished but honest. Then she turned back to them. I don't want to teach you how to be perfect. I want to teach you how to feel. Because if you don't feel it, no one else will. That became her motto. Not technique, but truth. And week after week, more students showed up, hungry not for grades, but for connection. Months passed. She traveled to D.C., then Chicago, then San Francisco, invited to speak about her journey, her late-blooming artistry, her unconventional path. At every stop, someone would raise their hand and ask the same thing. How did you do it? And every time Naomi would smile gently and say the same thing. I didn't wait for permission. I just played anyway. One day in March, she received a letter in the mail. Heavy paper. Gold seal. It was from a music foundation in New Orleans. Inside was a handwritten note. We've seen what happens when a broken piano meets a fearless spirit. Would you consider headlining our annual Pianos in the Park Gala? The piano you'll be playing is over 100 years old. Out of tune, missing 2 keys. We figured it was the right one for you. Naomi chuckled softly. She accepted. Because she knew now, some of the most powerful music comes from the places others ignore. Later that night, she visited the old upright in the practice room where it all began. The one Celeste had once pointed to as a dismissal. It was still dusty, still uneven, still beautiful. She sat and played, not for a crowd, not for a prize, just for herself. And in that quiet, golden room, with the keys whispering under her fingertips, Naomi felt something settle inside her. A truth she no longer needed to prove. She had never been unworthy. She had simply been undiscovered. The invitation arrived in an envelope of ivory paper with the conservatory's golden seal pressed into the flap. Inside, a single line. We would be honored if you would perform at this year's Whitmore opening ceremony. Naomi held the card in her hands for a long time, not because she was unsure, but because the weight of it felt like a bridge. One she had crossed once without even realizing it, and now was being asked to walk across again as a guest of honor. This time, the doors would open for her. The night of the ceremony, Naomi arrived alone. No stage crew, no student assistant to carry her coat, no fanfare. She walked quietly through the same marble halls she'd once mopped on Sunday evenings. Her fingers brushed the polished walls, touched the corner where she used to rest her cart, where she used to hum softly beneath her breath. The recital hall glowed ahead, lit now not for someone else's dream, but for hers. Inside, the audience sat in silence, waiting. Her name had already been announced. No introduction needed. She entered with slow steps, in a long black dress, simple and elegant, her only jewelry a silver bracelet once belonging to her mother. As she walked to the piano, there was no hesitation in her gait, no uncertainty in her shoulders. Just calm. The room was full of faces, former classmates, faculty, donors, and this time students who had grown up hearing her story. Jordan stood near the sound booth in the back, his arms folded, his eyes never leaving her. And Celeste sat in the front row, not as a judge, not as a mentor, but as a listener, a quiet supporter. Naomi sat at the grand piano, her fingers hovered above the keys, and she waited, not because she was unsure what to play, but because this moment deserved stillness. Then, with the gentlest pressure, she began. The music was new but familiar. It echoed the tones of the piece that had first brought her into the light, but now shaped with refinement, with grace, with the depth of someone who had lived both in shadow and brilliance. It wasn't a song of struggle, it was a song of arrival, of coming home. As the final note faded into silence, Naomi lifted her hands, and the room remained perfectly still. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, like a rising tide, the applause came, not thunderous like before, not frantic, but full, steady, respectful, reverent. This wasn't the clapping of people surprised. It was the applause of people grateful. Grateful to witness something true. Afterward, Naomi stood just off stage, sipping from a glass of water, greeting the occasional hand that reached for hers, accepting compliments with the grace of someone who no longer needed them to feel valid. A young girl approached, no older than 10, curly hair, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Miss Walker?" she said shyly. Naomi bent slightly. "Yes?" The girl held out a small notebook. "Can I show you something?" Naomi nodded. The girl opened to a page filled with staff lines and little hand-drawn notes. "It's a song I made up," she whispered. "I wrote it after I watched your video. I call it Window Light, because it's soft at first, but then it gets stronger." Naomi felt something catch in her chest. She touched the edge of the page. "It's beautiful. Do you think it's good enough?" Naomi knelt so they were eye level. "I think," she said gently, "that it already is." The girl smiled. "I want to be like you." Naomi shook her head. "No," she said. "Be like you. The world needs your sound." That night, Naomi walked home beneath the Boston streetlights. The air was still. The city buzzed behind her, but in her heart, only music. Not loud. Just present. When she reached her apartment door, she paused. On her way inside, she passed the upright piano she'd bought second-hand from a church thrift store 2 months earlier. Its bench sat slightly crooked. A few keys stuck on humid days, but she didn't fix it. She wanted to remember that music doesn't always come from perfection. Sometimes the most powerful songs begin in places no one's looking, in the quiet, in the dust, in the hands of a woman who once thought her dreams had an expiration date. Naomi sat. Her fingers touched the keys, and she played. Not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. For the little girl inside her, who used to dream of stages she could only clean. For the life she lived, and the one she built note by note. For the silence that had taught her to listen before she ever learned to play. And as the final chord resonated into the still night, Naomi Walker smiled. Because sometimes, the final note isn't an ending at all, it's a beginning. Have you ever felt like the world had already decided who you were before you even had a chance to speak? Naomi Walker didn't have a music degree. She didn't come from privilege. She didn't have a stage waiting for her. But what she did have was truth. And when she finally let it play, note by note, the world had no choice but to listen. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary talent doesn't wear a gown or carry a portfolio. Sometimes it wears a janitor's uniform and waits for the moment it no longer needs permission to shine. So if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or unheard, this story is for you. And if it moved you the way it moved us, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful real stories every week, stories of courage, second chances, and the hidden brilliance within everyday people. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from, and what dream are you still holding on to? Because you never know. The world may not be ready for your voice yet, but when it is, it will echo.